a good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy, Millsy, back with Home Encounter Commander, and we are back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list of the Commander in front of us on my quest to out-brew your favorite Magic channel. As always, link to the deck list will be down in the description if you're interested. We are in week 2 of Commander Masters, and I wanted to try to make sure we took care of all these new commanders up front first, and then do some of the the showcases and the old favorites along the way. This week we are looking at the Enduring Enchantments precon. That will be on Friday, but today we're taking a look at Narci, Fable Singer. This is a really fun commander. I think the ideas of Sagas are interesting. Of course, we just saw Tom Bombadil in Lord of the Rings in a popular Saga commander. If you have a Tom Bombadil deck, I think Narci fits very well in that deck. I think that'll be a great place to put it. But I thought, why not try, these Abzan style Enchantress decks. I've always been interested. Enchantment decks are one of the deck types I love with everything inside of me. I have made a couple of Selesnya decks, and I've been trying to get into 3 colors. And I think for me personally, this precon is going to do a lot. And we'll talk about Nexthea on Friday and what I think of her. But let's cover Narci today. Narci Fable Singer is a 1 white, black, green, 3/3 human bard. Lifelink. Whenever you sacrifice an enchantment and draw a card. So of course, when you hit the final ability of a saga, you would sacrifice it. Now, if there's a flip saga, you would exile it and bring it back. But for any ones that just run out, that's going to draw us a card. Or whenever else we would sacrifice an enchantment, we draw a card. And this is whenever the final chapter ability of a saga you control resolves, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is that saga's mana value. This is going to be the part of our commander we want to take advantage of. But the problem I think I found with Narci, and the thing I want to say right off the top about Narci, is that we have a lot of good high mana. We have a couple good high mana, mana value sagas in this color combination, but we don't have a ton. So we either need to machine gun the sagas out, which is going to be tough because there's not a ton of great, really great sagas unless we're trying to just literally play every saga we can, which again, Neon Dynasty was great for us and a lot of common and uncommon sagas for that. What I tried to do with this deck specifically was give us a really good enchantment base that cares about sagas, but we also can use things like Michiko's Reign of Truth and All That Glitters to help us kind of knock through for good damage, even though we, are trying to get all of our sagas. We still want sagas. We still want to see as many sagas as we can. But what I think is going to be great for a deck like Narci is that Doctor Who has already shown, that it's going to have a ton of new sagas, and sagas are something that anytime they try to do lore, they like to use sagas, right? We've seen that over the last year. Brothers War, for example, B1 had some sagas on the backside of Praetor. So there's a lot of different sagas that we have access to, and I think that will increase over time. So that's the thing I'd be excited about for a commander like Narci, is this isn't a commander where you're building it for all the cards we have now. You get all the great enchantment support, and then you're getting new sagas down the line. So if you look at Narci and you say, hey, I like Narci, I like the idea of it, but there aren't good sagas right now. Okay, but it's going to change. I promise you there'll be better sagas that are going to come out. And what I love about the idea of a deck like this is for the reason why I love some of the other decks that I have, which is that you can upgrade it over time and the deck will feel fresh when you add in some new stuff. But okay, so let's talk about the mana base. The mana base is fairly similar to what came out of the precon. The big things I added were the Innistrad lands that come in tap unless you have 2 or more other lands. The check lands, because we're playing a lot of basics, so I thought, why not play the check lands? We're also playing things like Canopy Vista, but we're playing a lot of basics, so I put in the check lands, and then the pain lands. I don't know, I feel like we're going to gain a ton of life. Enchantress decks seem to be very good at gaining life, so I don't think we mind the pain lands. I didn't add the Triumph. I decided to go for a Reflecting Pool instead. If you have the extra money, throw an Endartha Triumph in here for over one of our basic lands. And then if you have extra money, I think you can go ahead and toss in the fetch lands, and the shock lands, take out a few basics and do that. And I think you'll still do well. Like my first cut would probably be something like Fortified Village for an Endartha Triumph, and then from there take out 6 of our basics for the 3 fetches and the 3 shocks. If that's what you want to do to build up the mana base. All right, we'll get into the enchantments, and this is where, like I said, we have a great mix of sagas and non-sagas. What I'm going to do first is talk about the non-saga enchantments, and then we'll come back and talk about the sagas, because honestly, a lot of the sagas are just their sagas. We're trying to take advantage of the fact that they're sagas, but I think some of them are really important. Boon of the Spirit Realm is a new card from the precon, and I love this card. Whenever it or another enchantment enters a battlefield under control, put a blessing counter on it, and creatures you control get +1/+1 for each blessing counter on Boon of the Spirit Realm. This is one of those cards where, Enchantress decks can be great at making tokens, doing a lot of other things. This is going to buff our board and could potentially help us end the game, other than just this kind of incremental effect every time a saga ends. Darksteel Mutation turns a creature into an 0/1 with indestructible and no other abilities, in card types and creature types. We love removal like this, because my understanding is when this loses its target, we would sacrifice it. I could be wrong on that. We need to double check the rulings on that, but that's my understanding. And if that's the case, then we could potentially get an extra draw off of Narci that way. Enchantress Presence, a classic enchantment card, and it is in the precon as well. Whenever you cast an enchantment, you draw a card. This is great, can help us fill up our hand. Fertile Ground, I love cards like Fertile Ground in Wild Growth, especially in a deck like this, where I tried my best to make the budget as fair as I could. Obviously, you can toss in some money with removal spells and lands and things like that. Here you go, you put it on a land and it taps for another mana of any color. This stuff is great. I like this. Wild Growth, these are the things that are going to help us get enchantment casts for other cards, but also ramp. Grasp of Fate, seeing a reprint in the precon, was probably in my opinion, one of the better reprints. Grasp of Fate's such a fun card, and it being an enchantment makes it even better. It says when it enters the battlefield for each opponent, we exile up to one target non-land permanent that player controls until this leaves the battlefield, so we can potentially lock some things down. Yes, it puts a target on Grasp of Fate, but I don't think we mind that because we took out the things we really cared about. Hollow Haunting is probably my pick of probably one of the best cards to add to either the Anarchia precon or this deck. Hollow Haunting is such a fun card. It says as long as we have 7 or more enchantments, creatures we control have flying and vigilance. We're probably going to hit that pretty easily. Enchantment decks are very good at just swarming the bar with enchantments. But it does say whenever you cast an enchantment, we can make a spirit, cleric, creature token with this creature's power and toughness is equal to the number of spirits you control. So what you basically want to do with Hollow Haunting is start getting these spirits out. And then once you have 7 or more enchantments, all your creatures have flying and vigilance, and these spirits are going to get huge, and hopefully they can just start hitting our opponents, knocking them out. Of course, a card like Historian's Boon from Dominator United's Commander decks get even better here. Whenever it or another non-token enchantment enters the battlefield control, we get a token, which is great. We want the tokens. Again, cards like Boon of the Spirit Realm help us with the tokens. But then it says whenever the final chapter ability of a saga you control triggers, we make a 4/4 angel. Well, that's pretty great, because now we're getting, not just are we getting the life loss and the life gain off of sagas, now hopefully we can get a 4/4 out of it. Kenra's Transformation, very similar to Darksteel here. It's removal, draws us a card when it comes in, and it can lock down something. Now, it doesn't give it the indestructible like Darksteel Mutation does, but I like it because it loses all abilities. And of course, this is great on someone's commander or someone's combo piece that's really doing good work. Love that Mirari's Wake got a reprint in the precon. I love Mirari's Wake. It's one of my favorite cards for Enchantress decks because it gives you a flat buff for every creatures, but it doubles up on your mana. And you don't mind playing Mirari's Wake if it means you can play more things next turn. Oubliette is one of my favorite of these one of these Banishing Light style effects. It says when it enters the battlefield, target creature phases out until it leaves the battlefield. Tap that creature as it phases in this way. The cool part about Oubliette is very dangerous for other people when we target their commanders, because that creature phases out. It doesn't get exiled. It doesn't leave like Grasp of Fate where they could just put it back in the command zone. It just phases out, which means they have to deal with Oubliette to get that thing back. And I think that's what makes Oubliette even better, is because if we can pick the right thing, we're going to take advantage. I put Seal of Cleansing and Seal of Primordium in here because they both take advantage of drawing off of Narci. They both come in for 2 mana. We sacrifice them at instant speed, destroy target artifact or enchantment. This is a great way for us to potentially have reactions to combos and things like that, but also just get rid of the things potentially we need to get rid of. Sigil of the Empty Throne, whenever we cast an enchantment, we get a 4/4 angel. Again, Sigil's a little bit expensive, but I like this ability, and if we have a ton of mana like Enchantress decks tend to do, we don't mind paying the 5 for those tokens on future turns. Sterling Grove, one of my favorite hands down enchantments for most Enchantress decks. Gives all of our enchantments we control other than its Shroud. Gonna stop our opponents from targeting them. Unfortunately, it does stop us from targeting them, but the cool part is for 1 mana, we can sack it to go get any enchantment we want, reveal it, and put it on top. So it's kind of like a mini Enlightened Tutor for us on a card. Sterling Grove will help us a ton, especially when it comes to sticking. Our commander's not an enchantment. Never mind. If our commander was an enchantment, it would help us protect our enchantment. But it's also going to our commander. But it's going to help us protect every other enchantment we have. And believe me, some of them our opponents are going to want to blow up. Right, Mirari's Wake is an example. But we also have all of these sagas that they may want to try to blow up before that final ability resolves, and we get all of Narci's ability. Okay, as far as the sagas go, I could go through them one by one, and there's a lot of interesting sagas that we have next to. I want to talk about the big mana ones. Were the ones that I deem to be really critical. The first is Battle at the Hell Vault. This is one of the new ones from the precon. So on 1 and 2, you exile up to 1 target non-saga, non-land permanent that player controls until it leaves the battlefield. And then on 3, we get a legendary 8/8 white angel creature token named Avacyn with flying, vigilance, and indestructible. This is great because it's 6 mana, so when it goes off, the third ability goes off and it sacrifices, everybody loses 6, we gain 6. So that's great. Binding the Old Gods isn't terribly expensive, but it does a lot of things. The first one destroys target non-land permanent. The second one gets us a forest card. Now, it says forest card, not forest basic land. So if we were running that Triome, or we were running those shock lands, or we're running any land that has a forest type, we can go get it with Binding the Old Gods. And the third one gives all of our creatures Death Touch, which again, could come in handy depending on how that works. In a deck we're running a lot more basic lands, I really like Boseiju Reaches Skyward. So the first one gets us 2 forests, basic forest puts them into our hand. Number 2 puts a land card from our graveyard on top of our library. This would be even better for playing fetches, but it's okay. Again, it's 4 mana, so it is still going to ping our opponents for 4 mana for life, but actually it won't because it exiles itself and brings itself back into Branch of Boseiju that gets +1/+1 for each land we control. So this is great because it's then going to turn into a big creature. I wish, obviously, so we won't get the Narci ability. No, we will. It doesn't say sacrifice. I can't believe I keep thinking in my head you have to sacrifice the saga. No, we will get it. We will get the 4 loss of life and the 4 gain life. That makes this even better. I think I actually kind of avoided some sagas because I thought it meant, oh, well, if you flip them, you don't get it. But the other ones I was playing that flipped were just good enough on their own. But man, that actually might change some of the sagas you choose to play. Elspeth Conquers deck, another great one. First one exiles a target permanent that an opponent controls with CMC 3 or greater, or mana value 3 or greater. Second one, non-creature spells your opponent's control cost 2 or more to cast until your next turn. And then 3 brings a creature or planeswalker from your graveyard back to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter or a loyalty counter on it. Again, 5 mana, so it's going to ping our opponents for 5, and then potentially get something back that they destroyed. Michiko's Reign of Truth is one of my favorite modern enchantments for enchantment decks, just because if you're playing with enough creatures and you're doing, if you're playing enough enchantments, this is going to hurt. 1 and 2 give a creature +1/+1 for each artifact and enchantment you control, and then on 3 it flips into a creature that gets +1/+1 for each artifact or enchantment you control. This could just get out of hand if you play this at the right time. If your creatures have flying or trample or whatever, you're going to hit through for a ton of damage, and then this flips over and it just becomes a big creature on the backside. Cruelty of Gix is kind of interesting. It has read ahead, so we could go all the way to number 3 automatically and make our opponents lose 5 life. But I think we'll want to start with number 2. Get that card, put it into our hand, lose the 3 life, and then have that final ability go off the next turn. Again, we like the search because we can get anything we want, but then we hopefully are going to take advantage of that 5 loss of life. Tale of Two Novellas is interesting. It's 5 mana, so that's 5 damage, hopefully. So it's a target creature you control that gets indestructible for as long as we control it. That could be kind of great for our commander or something else. Return creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. This could get something important back. And then on the third one, up to 2 target creatures you control each gain lifelink until end of turn. Well, this is really great if we're buffing something up or using something like Michiko's, right, to buff something up and just get a bunch of life. Eldest Reborn is probably one of those cards that a lot of people are going to talk about when they think of sagas. I think most more modern players who have played in Standard and things like that are going to think of Elspeth Conquers Death and Eldest Reborn and probably Cruelty of Gix before the rest of them, because these are 3 of them that got so much play in Standard that they'll be memorable. Eldest Reborn says, first one, each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Gets around Indestructible, gets around Shroud, gets around Hexproof, because their opponent has to choose. And if your opponent only has one creature, if they're playing their Voltron deck, or they only have one one thing on the battlefield, they have to do it. Number 2, each opponent discards a card. And then number 3, we can put any creature or planeswalker from a graveyard back onto the battlefield under our control, which is great. We love it. And again, 5 damage to our opponents in the process. I like a card like First to Row in games because it's kind of a Jack of all trades Saga. We get a token, then we get 3+1/+1 counters on a creature, then we draw 2 if we control creature power 4 or greater, and then we get a gold token, which is effectively a treasure. It does the same thing. So that's pretty great. 3 mana gets you 4 things, and then 3 damage, hopefully, to our opponents. And then it may look like a small enchantment, but I like a card like Triumph of Gerard. It says, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control with the greatest power, so that creature gets buffed twice. And on the third one, it says target creature you control with the greatest power gets flying, first strike, and lifelink until a turn, which could potentially get them in the air above our opponent's things and hurt them. So as you can see here, we've got a bunch of Sagas that now I realize are great no matter whether they flip or not. And then we have a bunch of enchantments to support. For spells, we're really not playing a ton. We're playing our little suite of ramp here because we're still playing the basic lands. Extinguish All Hope can destroy all non-enchantment creatures. It's going to be most of our creatures, so we love it. Search for Glory can get a legendary card or a saga. That's great because we do have some legendary creatures we care about, but we also have sagas in our deck, so we care about those. And then for instance, this is where I spent a little bit of the deck's money in getting premium removal. Anguished Unmaking and Assassin's Trophy are some of the best removal spells we have in our color, hitting any non-land permanent. Of course, Assassin's Trophy can hit a land permanent, but most of the time you're targeting a non-land permanent. Same thing with Anguished Unmaking. Anguished is going to exile, Assassin's Trophy is going to destroy, but they're both going to hit anything. We then add in Beast Within, which is another great option in these color combinations. Again, destroying any permanent and its controller getting a 3/3. Again, these two can target lands if you want them to, but again, we want this Jack of all suites removal because we get to then add in Darkseid Mutation and Kenriths and Grasp of Fate, Oubliette. You could see our removal suite is bigger than it looks. We don't just need them all to be an instance. And then Heroic Intervention to protect our board. I really wanted to throw Clever Concealment in here. I just couldn't find the spot for it, but if you're interested in more protection, Clever Concealment's great because it will phase all your permanents out, and I think it's a great add. We're playing just one Planeswalker, mainly because it came in the pre-con, but I still think it's a good card. It says, of course, Calyx, Destiny's Hand, 4 mana for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker, +1, look at the top 5. You can reveal an enchantment and put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom. That's not bad if we're looking for something to play or we're digging for something. -3 says exile target creature and enchantment you don't control until target enchantment you do control leaves the battlefield. Yes, it puts a target on one of the enchantments we control, but the cool part is we can hopefully just knock some things out of the game and then protect that enchantment that they're trying to get rid of. -7 return all enchantments from your graveyard to the battlefield. So here's kind of this replenish effect, a Brilliant Restoration type effect to bring everything back if need be. We can +1, get some things, -3 if we need to. I like Calyx. He's got some interesting utility. He's not the best Planeswalker in the world, but I think for a deck that cares about enchantments, it does enough of what we need it to do. All right, well, here's our creatures for the deck. We're playing a lot of creatures. Granted, most of them are enchantments because we want to take advantage of still our Enchantress draw effects. But I think we get to play some really fun creatures. Weaver of Harmony gives all of our enchantment creatures +1/+1, but for a green and tap, we can activate a copy of target activated or a triggered ability you control from an enchantment source. You can choose new targets for the copy. Weaver of Harmony cannot copy our commander because our commander is not an enchantment, but this can copy a lot of other things. This can copy our sagas. This can copy so many abilities in our deck. So I like Weaver of Harmony. It feels really good in a deck like this because it can copy the right things. We're playing one of the most well-known Enchantress commanders of all time in Sithis Harvest Hand, drawing us cards and getting us life whenever we cast enchantments, help refill our hand, gain us some life back in the process. Setessan Champion, one of the best constellation cards that's ever been printed. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw cards. Setessan Champion gets big, you draw cards in the process. I think if there's any one card that I thought this deck might try to use to take advantage of, it's Satsuki the Living Lord. This was the green-white Sagas commander we got in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and I didn't think it had enough support, but I think maybe it feels like a great secondary commander in Narci. Tap to put a lore counter on every Saga you control. We can only do it at sorcery speed. That's great because we potentially get two portions of a Saga in one turn, right? The automatic one that goes off, and then put one more on it. It says whenever it dies, we can return a Saga or enchantment creature we control to its owner's hand, or return a Saga from our graveyard to our hand, and we can kind of get it back if need be. Again, Satsuki seems interesting. She can tap to add things to our Sagas, potentially get more than one of them to go off in a turn with Narci on the battlefield to deal some damage and get some life back. Again, I think interesting secondary commander if we can make her work. Sanctum Weaver, to me, is a auto-include in any Enchantress deck. It taps for mana of any one color, where X is the number of enchantments you control. Again, the bigger our board is, the more mana we get off Sanctum Weaver. Undo Spirit Dancer is one of the new cards in the precon, and I think this fits this deck really well. It's not an enchantment, but it says whenever an enchantment you can enters battlefield under your control, you may create a token that's a copy of it. Do this only once per turn. So it's not tagged as a constellation ability because it doesn't happen every time one comes in. It just happened once per turn. But the cool part about Spirit Dancer is we can take advantage of what's coming in to get a copy of. And it says you may, so we can always wait. We could put something down and then put this down, play something, and then play something else. Obviously, we wait for one of our big Sagas to come out, because when you make a token copy of a permanent, you keep the mana value on that permanent, so it would carry over for Narci's ability to deal damage. Nyxhorn Behemoth is exactly what I want. 12 mana, 10/10 with Trample. It says it costs X less to cast, where X is the total mana value of non-creature enchantments you control. Not going to be hard in a deck like this to get this down for a little to no mana. And we can pay 2 to sacrifice another enchantment to give it indestructible. This could potentially draw us a card off Narci, but it also is just going to make this tough to deal with. 10/10 with Trample, not a bad thing to buff up. Catilda feels like a slam dunk here. We're playing Hallowed Haunting, which always goes very well with Catilda, but it just has flying lifelink protection from vampires. It's a star, where the stars equals the number of permanents you control that are spirits or enchantments. We have a lot of enchantments, but on the backside, if we get it into the graveyard, we can enchant a creature and give it +X, where X is the number of permanents we control that are spirits or enchantments, and flying and lifelink. This could potentially get on a creature to hit in for big damage. This could go on our commander to risk commander damage on our opponents. I like Catilda, and it feels even better in a deck like this, where we're going to have so many enchantments running around. Jukai Naturalist and Herald of the Pantheon play very similar effects, each of them making enchantment spells we cast cost 1 less to cast, and of course, Herald will gain us a life every time we do it. Heliod, God of the Sun, got a reprint in the precon, and this is a card I love for a deck like this because it's going to give us all of our creatures vigilance, which is great because we can attack and then block, but also for 4 mana, if we got some extra mana, we can make some enchantment tokens. They do count for all of our constellation abilities if we need to do that, or they'll just add to our enchantment count for other abilities. So I like Heliod. He pairs really well with a card like Grim Guardian that says whenever it or another enchantment enters battlefield control, each opponent loses a life. I chose to play this over Doomwake Giant, even though Doomwake Giant got its reprint in the deck, and I think it would fit here really well as well. I just had to try to make some spots, so I think depending on what you want to do with your deck, you could definitely bring Doomwake Giant, and Doomwake Giant says when it has a constellation ability, whenever it or another enchantment enters battlefield control, creatures your opponents control get -1/-1 until it turns, so you could potentially wipe the board that way of your opponent's creatures. So again, I like both. I just like Grim Guardian because it's a teeny bit cheaper. Eidolon of Blossoms has a constellation ability of whenever it or another enchantment comes in, we draw a card. That's great. Another piece of card draw. Dryad got a reprint in the precon, which is killer because this card was getting pretty expensive. You can play additional land on each of your turns. That's great. If we're drawing a lot of cards, we're going to end up having lands in our hand, and then lands you control are every basic type in addition to their other types. This won't come into play very often, but it's just good to have. It's good to have basically because then we can tap all of our lands for any color, but also we can play an extra one each turn. I think a deck like this could support an Exploration or a Burgeoning because we're going to be drawing so many cards anyway. We'll probably have extra lands to throw down, but I want to focus more on the synergy and the draw and getting the engine going rather than that. Destiny Spinner, creatures and enchantments we control can't be countered. And then for 4 mana, we can turn a land into an XX where X is the number of enchantments we control. That's pretty great because it gets trample and haste, and depending on how many lands, that could be pretty hard to deal with. Daxos is a card I really like because I think it's kind of interesting in a deck like this. Whenever we cast an enchantment spell, we get an experience counter. We get the experience counter, not Daxos. The cool part is if Daxos comes back, he can still see all of the experience counters we already have if it were to die. And then for 3 mana, we get to put a spirit enchantment creature token on the battlefield. That's a star, where star is the number of experience counters we have. Well, this is great because this kind of acts like that Hallowed Haunting, where we're just going to make these spirits that are just going to be probably massive. In the case of Hallowed Haunting, but here, hopefully we can get this down early, start stacking these up, or we can hopefully cast enough enchantments to make it big. Of course, Daxos takes a little bit more setup than the rest of our creatures and abilities that we have with this type, but I still think Daxos is fun, and it allows us to have another mini commander if we need something to help us take control of the board. Composer of Spring seems like a really fun card. It's going to probably carry a pretty hefty price tag for a while because it's a darn good card. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a land card from your hand on the battlefield tapped. But if we control 6 or more, we can put a creature or land card from our hand on the battlefield tapped. This is great because if that creature is an enchantment, then we can keep going on this train of putting creatures down tapped, or we can just put those extra lands we're probably going to have in our hand because we're drawing so many cards on the battlefield tapped. Calyx, a card I absolutely love. This guy came out in March of the Machines, The Aftermath. It says whenever it or another enchantment enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. We can grow our board, grow one creature, whatever we want to do. This says whenever it or an enchanted creature you control deals damage to a player, you may create a token's copy of a non-legendary enchantment you control. Do this only once per turn. That's a fancy ability, but basically we can potentially make copies of enchantments that we have. And that can be very important depending on what we copy. We could copy our sagas, which is pretty cool, and then we can get the ability from Narci when they go off, but we can also copy a lot of other things. I like Calyx. I think it works, again, great as another one of these mini commanders in the deck. And if Narci were to die or become hard for us to get back, I think Calyx could be a great commander to take over the deck and try to keep our value train going. I think that's the important part of secondary commanders in your deck, is making sure you keep your value train going if you can't use your primary commander. Archon of Sun's Grace, getting us tokens whenever enchantments come in, and then all of our Pegasus have lifelink, and that's pretty great. And then we're playing the commander of that precon, Anixia, Hand of Erebos, a 5-mana 4/4 that gives all of our enchantment creatures menace. I think this is important because a lot of our creatures are enchantments, and especially those sagas that flip are still enchantments, so this still works out great. This is whenever it ETBs or attacks, exile up to 1 non-or enchantment card from your graveyard, create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 3/3 zombie in addition to other types. This works really well in Narci because if we have a saga in our graveyard that already finished, we can make a token copy of it. It's still a saga, it's still going to run down its abilities, but we get to use it as a creature while it's doing its thing. So I like Anixia here. I think she's a great commander in her own right, and we'll talk about that on Friday, but I think she does support Narci here in kind of helping her get her sagas back and doing them again, hopefully, and potentially. Right, we're exiling it when we do this, so the saga will be gone. We can hopefully just go through all the sagas in our graveyard, get them back, use them again, have our opponents lose life again. So let me know, what do you guys think of Narci down in the comments? Again, like I said, I think we're going to get more sagas out of Doctor Who that'll probably help. I've already seen one that's spoiled that seemed like it'd be half decent. And like I said, sagas are a great thing because anytime we go to a plane that has lots of lore, or like we saw in Kaldheim, you have a new plane and they want to show the story, they're going to make sagas. So I like it. I think that this has like I said, a potential to be a deck that you can update in the future when we get new sagas and new cards. And also, you get a good start to this deck from that precon. That Anixia precon is going to give you most of this deck, with the exception of some of the higher end sagas, which is going to be great because then that's going to allow you to get a fun deck out of it. I will probably be pretty honestly testing this. I think it seemed kind of interesting. I think I lean towards Anixia a little bit more because she's a more traditional Enchantress style commander, but I like it. I think it's interesting. I think it's a fun spin. Bombadil is going to get all the splashy 5-color sagas, because let's be honest, there are some great sagas that aren't in our colors and 5-color sagas. But I think over time, this deck will get access to better sagas. We still have the two best colors for enchantments in green and white, so we're still going to always have great enchantress support, great enchantment support in our repertoire. And I think over time you can make the enchantress part of this deck even better. Add in your enlightened tutors, add in your things, make the deck what you want it to be again. I think this is a great starting point if you bought that precon, or if you're looking for an enchantress deck, this ain't a half bad one that you could technically just put Narci as the commander of that precon and work from there. But thank you guys so much for watching. I will catch you guys next